keys to mastery. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the lustre of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought, because it is his. In every work of genius we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain aligned majesty. Ralph Waldo Emerson. All of us are born with an essentially similar brain, with more or less the same configuration and potential for mastery. Why is it then that in history only a limited number of people seem to truly excel and realize this potential power? Certainly, in a particular sense, this is the most important question for us to answer. The common explanations for a Mozart or a Leonardo da Vinci revolve around natural talent and brilliance. How else to account for their uncanny achievements except in terms of something they were born with? But there stands upon thousands of children display exceptional skill and talent in some field, yet relatively few of them even ever amount to anything. Whereas those who are less brilliant in their youth can often attain much more. Natural talent or a high IQ cannot explain future achievements. As a classic example, compare the lives of Sir Francis Galton to his older cousin, Charles Darwin. By all accounts, Galton was a super genius with an exceptionally high IQ, quite a bit higher than Darwin's. These are estimates done by experts years after the invention of the measurement. Galton was a boy. Wonder who went on to have an illustration-specific career, but he never quite mastered any of the fields he went through. He was notoriously restless, as is often the case with child prodigies. Darwin, by contrast, is highly celebrated as the superior scientist, one of the few who has forever changed our view of life. As Darwin himself admitted, he was a very ordinary boy, rather below the common standards in intellect. I have no greater quickness of apprehension. My power to follow a long and purely abstract train of thought is very limited. Darwin, however, might have possessed something that Galton lacked. In many ways, a look at the early life of Darwin himself can supply an answer to this mystery. As a child, Darwin had one overwhelming passion: collecting biological specimens. His father, a doctor, wanted him to follow in his footsteps and study medicine, enrolling him at the University of Edinburgh. Darwin did not take this subject and was a mediocre student. His father, despairing that his son would ever amount to anything, chose for him a career in the church. As Darwin was preparing for this, a former professor of his told him that the HMS Beagle was to leave port soon to sail around the world, and that it needed ship's biologists to accompany the crew in order to collect specimens that could be sent back to England. Despite his father's protests, Darwin took the job. Sometimes in him was drawn to the voyage. Suddenly, his passion for collecting found its perfect outlet. In South America, he could collect the most astounding array of specimens, as well as fossils and bones. He could connect his interests in the variety of life on the planet with something larger. Major questions about the origin of species. He poured all his energy into this enterprise, accumulating so many specimens that a theory began to take shape in his mind. After 5 years at sea, he returned to England and devoted the rest of his life to a single task of elaborating his theory of evolution. In the process, he had to deal with a tremendous amount of drudgery. For instance, 8 years exclusively studying brancals to establish his credentials as a biologist, had to develop highly refined political and social skills to handle all the prejudged against such a theory in Victorian England. And what sustained him throughout this lengthy process was his intense love and connection to the subject. The basic elements of this theory are repeated in the lives of all the great masters in history. A youthful passion or predilection, a chance encounter that allows them to discover how to apply it, an apprenticeship in which they come alive with energy and focus. They excel by their ability to practice harder and move faster through the process. All of this stemming from the intensity of their desire to learn and from the deep connection they feel for their field of study. And at the core of this intensity of effort is in fact a quality that is generic and inborn, not talent or brilliance, which is something that might be developed, but a rather deep and powerful inclination towards a particular subject. This inclination is a reflection of a person's uniqueness. The uniqueness is not something merely poetic or philosophical. It is a scientific fact that generally every one of us is unique. Or exact generic makeup has never happened before and will never be repeated. This uniqueness is revealed to us through the preferences we innately feel for particular activities or subjects of study. Such inclinations can be toward music or mathematics, certain sports or games, solving puzzle-like problems, tinkering and building, or playing with words. With those who stand out by their later mastery, they experience this inclination more deeply and clearly than others. They experience it as an inner calling. It tends to dominate their thoughts and dreams. They find their way, by accident or sheer effort, to a career path in which this inclination can flourish. This intense connection and desire allows them to withstand the pain of the process, the self-doubts, the tedious hours of practice and study, the inevitable setbacks, the endless barbs from the envious. They develop restlessly and confidence that others lack. In our culture, we tend to equate thinking and intellectual powers with success and achievement. In many ways, however, it is an emotional quality that separates those who master a field from many who simply work at a job. Our levels of desire, patience, presence, persistence, and confidence end up playing a much larger role in success than sheer reasoning powers. Feeling motivated and energized, we can overcome almost everything. Feeling bothered and restless, our minds shut off and we become increasingly passive. In the past, only elites or those with an almost superhuman amount of energy and drive could pursue a career of their choices and master it. A man was born into the military or groomed for the government, chosen among those for the right class and of the right class. If he happened to display a talent and desire for such work, it was mostly a coincidence. Millions of people who were not a part of the right social class, gender, and ethnic group were rigidly excluded from the possibility of pursuing their calling. Even if people wanted to follow their inclinations, access to the information and knowledge pertaining to that particular field was controlled by elites. This is why there are relatively few masters in the past and why they stand out so much. These social and political barriers, however, have mostly disappeared. Today we have all kinds of access to information and knowledge that past masters could only dream about. Now more than ever, we have capacity and freedom to move toward the inclination that all of us possess as a part of our genetic uniqueness. It is time that the word genius becomes domestic field and de-rarefied. We're closer than we think to such intelligence. The word genius comes from the Latin and originally referred to a guardian spirit who watched over the birth of each person. It later came to refer to the innate qualities to make each person uniquely gifted. Although we may find ourselves at a historical moment rich in possibility for mastery in which more than people can move towards their inclinations, we in fact face one last obstacle in attaining such power, one that is cultural and endlessly dangerous. That very concept of mastery has become denigrated, associated with something old-fashioned, and even unpleasant. It is generally not seen as something to aspire to. This shift in value is rather recent. It can be traced to circumstances particular to our times. We live in a world that seems increasingly beyond our control. Our livelihoods are at the whim of globalized forces. The problem that we face, economic, environmental, and so on, cannot be solved by our individual actions. Our politicians are distant and unresponsive to our desires. A natural response. People can feel overwhelmed. It is to retreat them into various forms of passivity. We don't try too much in life. If we limit ourselves, our circle of action, we can give ourselves the illustration of control. The less we attempt, the less chances of failure. If we can make it look like we're not really responsible for our fate, for what happens to us in our life, then our apparent powerlessness is more palatable. For this reason, we become attached to certain narratives. It is genetics that determines much of what we do. We are just products of our times. The individual is just a myth. Human behavior can be reduced to statistical trends. Many take this change in a value a step further, giving their passivity a positive veneer. They romanticize the self-destructive artist who loses control of him or herself. Anything that smacks of discipline or effort seems fussy and passé. Which matters is the feeling behind the artwork. And any hint of craftsmanship or work violates this principle. They come to accept things that are made and quickly. The idea that they might have to expend much effort to get what they want has been eroded by the proliferation of devices that do so much of the work for them, fostering the idea that they deserve all of this. That is their inherent right to have and consume what they want. Why bother working for years to attain mastery when we can have so much power with very little effort? Technology will sell everything. This passively has even assumed moral stance. Mastery and power are evil. They are the domain of practical elites who oppress us. The power is inherently bad. Better to opt out with the system altogether, or at least make it look that way. If you're not careful, you will find this attitude inflecting you in the subtler ways. You will unconsciously lower your sights as to what you can accomplish in life. This can diminish your levels of effort and discipline below the point of effectiveness. Conforming to social norms, you will listen more to others than to your own voice. You may choose a career path based on what peers and parents tell you, or on what seems lucrative. If you lose contact with this inner calling, you can have some success in life, but eventually your lack of true desire catches up with you. Your work becomes mechanical. You come to live for leisure and intimidate pleasures. In this way, you become increasingly passive and never more past the first phase. You might grow frustrated and depressed, never realizing the source of it is your alien attention from what your own creative potential. Before it's too late, you must find your way to your inclination, exploiting the incredible opportunities of the age that you could have been born into. Knowing the critical importance of desire and your emotional connection to your work, which are the keys to mastery, you can in fact make the passivity of these times work in your favor and serve as a motivating device in your first important ways. First, you must see your attempt at attaining mastery as something extremely necessary and positive. The world is teeming with problems, many of them of our own creation. To solve them will require a tremendous amount of effort and creativity. Relying on genetics, technology, magic, or amount of effort and or being nice and natural will not save us. We require the energy not only to address particular matters, but also forge new institutions and orders that fit our changed circumstances. We must create our own world, or we will die from inclination. We need to find our way back to the concept of mastery that defined us as a species so many millions of years ago. This is not mastery for the purpose of dominating nature or other people, but for determining our fate. The passive ironic attitude is not cool or romantic, but pathetic and decadent. You are setting an example of what can be achieved as a master in the modern world. You are contributing to the most important cause of all the survival and prosperity of human race in a time of stagnation. Second, you must convince yourself of the following. People get the mind and quality of brain that they deserve through their actions in life, despite the popularity of generic explanations of our behaviors. Recent discoveries in neuroscience are over long-held beliefs that the brain is generically hardwired. Scientists are demonstrating the degree to which the brain is actually quite plastic. How our thoughts determine our mental landscape. They are exploring the relationship of willpower to psychology, how profoundly the mind can affect our health and functionality. It is possible the more and more we discover about how deeply we create the various patterns of our lives throughout certain mental operations, how we are truly responsible for so much of what happens to us. Because people who are passive create a mental landscape that is rather barren. Because of their limited experiences and actions, all kinds of connections in the brain die off from the lack of use. Pushing against the passive trend of these times, you must work to see how far you can extend control of your circumstances and create the kind of mind you desire, not through drugs, but through action. Unleashing the masterful mind within, you will be at the vanguard of those are exploring the extended limits of willpower. In many ways, the movement from one level of intelligence to another can be considered as a kind of ritual of transformation. As it progresses, old ideas and perspectives die off. As new powers are unleashed, you are initiated into higher levels of seeing the world. Consider mastery as an invaluable tool in our guiding you through this transformative process. The book is designed to lead you from the lowest levels to the highest. It will help to initiate you into the first step, discovering your life's task or vocation, and how to carve out a path that will lead you to its fulfillment on various levels. It will advertise you how to explore it to the fullest, your apprenticeship, the various strategies of observation and learning that will serve you the best in this phase. How to find the perfect mentors, how to decipher the unwritten code on political behaviors, how to culture social intelligence, and finally, how to recognize when it's time to leave the apprenticeship nest and strike out yourself, entering the active, creative phase. I will show you how to continue the learning process on a higher level. It will reveal timeless strategies for creative problem solving, for keeping your mind fluid and adaptable. It will show you how to access more unconscious and primitive layers of intelligence, and how to endure the inevitable barbs of envy that will come your way. It will spell out the powers that will come to you through mastery, pointing you in the direction of that intuitive insight field of your field. Finally, it will initiate you into a philosophy, a way of thinking that will make you easier to follow his path. The ideas in the book that are based on extensive research in the field of neuro and cognitive science, studies on creativity, as well as the biography of the greatest masters in history. These include Leonardo da Vinci, the Zen master Haken, Benjamin Franklin, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, John and Wolfgang von Goethe, the poet John Keats, the scientist Michael Faraday, Charles Darwin, Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, Henry Ford, the writer Marcel Proust, the dancer Martha Gotham, and the inventor Buckminster Fuller, the jazz artist John Coltrane, and the pianist Glenn Gould. To make it clear how this form of intelligence can be applied to the modern world, 9 contemporary masters have been interviewed at length as well. They are neuroscientists versus Ramachandran, anthropologist, linguist Daniel Evan, computer engineer, writer, and tech startup mastermind Paul Gotham, architect engineer Santiago Calderava, former boxer and now trainer Freddie Roach, robotics engineer and green technology designer, Yoku Matuska, the visual artist Teresa Fernandez, the professor of animal husbandry and industrial designer Temple Garden, and U.S. Air Force fighter pilot Ace Cesar Rudinas. The life stories of these various contemporary figures dispel at the notion that mastery is somehow passé or elitist. They come from all different backgrounds, social cases, and ethics. The power they have achieved is clearly the result of effort and process, not genetics or privilege. Their stories also reveal how such mastery can be adapted to our times and the tremendous power it can bring us. The structure of mastery is simple. There are 6 chapters moving sequentially through the process. Chapter 1 is the starting point. Discovering your calling, your life tasks. Chapter 2, 3, and 4 discuss different elements of the apprenticeship phase. Learning skills, working with mentors, acquiring social intelligence. Chapter 5 is devoted to the creative active phase, and Chapter 6 to the ultimate goal mastery. Each chapter begins with the story of an iconic historical figure who exemplifies the chapter's overall concept. The section that follows, Keys to Mastery, gives you detailed analysis of the phase involved, concentrate ideas on how to apply this knowledge to your circumstances, and the mindset that is necessary to fully exploit these ideas. Following the keys is a section detailing the strategies of masters, contemporary and historical, who have used various methods to advance them through the process. These strategies are designed to give you even greater sense of practical application on the ideas in the book, and to inspire you to follow in footsteps of these masters, showing how their power is immediately attainable. For all the contemporary masters, and some of the historical ones, their stories will continue over several chapters. In such cases, they might be a slight repetition of biographical information in order to recap what happened in the previous phase of their lives. Paid chapters in parentheses will refer back to these earlier narrations. Finally, you must not see this process of moving through the levels of intelligence as merely linear, heading towards some kind of ultimate destination known as mastery. Your whole life is a kind of apprenticeship to which you apply your learning skills. Everything that happens to you is a form of instruction. If you pay attention, the creativity that you gain as learning a skill so deeply must be consistently refreshed. As you keep forcing your mind back to a state of openness, even knowledge of your vocation must be revisited throughout the course of your life as changes and circumstance force you to adapt its direction. In moving forward, mastery, you're bringing your mind closer to reality and to life itself. Anything that is alive is in a continuous state of change and movement. This moment that you rest, thinking that you have attained the level you desire, a part of your mind enters a phase of decay. You lose your hard-earned creativity, and others begin to sense it. This is a power and intelligence that must be continuously renewed, or it will die. Do not talk about giftedness, inborn talents. One can name great men of all kinds who were very gifted. They acquire greatness, become geniuses, as we put it, through qualities the lack of which no one who knew what they were would boast of. They all possess the seriousness of the efficient workman, which first learns to construct the parts properly before it ventures to fashion a great whole. They allowed themselves time for it, because they took more pleasure in making the little secondary things well than in the effect of a dazzling whole. Friedrich Nietzsche